Here we go.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and this is a midnight edition. And do you all know why I am releasing this podcast at midnight, March 24th? Take a wild guess, ladies and gentlemen. The transfer portal is officially open, and this will hopefully serve as your guide throughout this portal season for Syracuse basketball. We're going to talk about what you need to expect from the Orange in the portal season. Also, the money that's being thrown around during the transfer portal, and also the fact that centers are the most valuable position in the transfer portal. But first, the Orange will enter the portal with a ton of roster flexibility. Now, before we get to everything, and trust me, there's a lot to go over here on this edition of Locked On Syracuse. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So as I said earlier, this podcast is a transfer portal guide. It will hopefully help you all during this very busy and chaotic time for Syracuse basketball. Hopefully by the end, none of you all are confused about the portal and for Syracuse basketball. But of course, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments section below. I will do my best to get to all of them. If for whatever reason I can't get to them, or maybe you in the audience, you have the answer to the question, feel free to respond to people in the comments section below. Let's all help each other out here on Locked On Syracuse. And with that being said, the transfer portal is officially open. What does this mean? It means that any player from any team around the country can enter the transfer portal and go to a new team between now and when the portal closes on April 22nd. So that gives everyone 29 days to enter the transfer portal. That's actually down from what it was a year ago. I don't have the exact amount of days it was last season, but I do know that the portal opened the day after Selection Sunday. At least for this season, it's opening up after the round of 32 has concluded. So there are cases where players can enter the portal beyond the deadline date, which in this case is April 22nd. But unless Syracuse basketball fires Adrian Autry during the portal window, it's not going to happen, ladies and gentlemen. It's not going to apply to Syracuse, okay? They have between now and April 22nd to officially enter the portal. Also, very important to note this, all right, ladies and gentlemen? Players do not necessarily have to commit to a new school or decide to remain with their own school by April 22nd, okay? It just means that is your deadline to actually enter the transfer portal. For example, Syracuse basketball, they got Lucas Taylor from Georgia State last offseason. Lucas Taylor was in the transfer portal for a very long time before he ended up with Syracuse. He committed to the Orange in June of 2024. What is the mission for Syracuse basketball in this transfer portal season? I think we can all make a fair guess as to what it is. Build a team that gets Syracuse back into the NCAA tournament for the first time since 2021. You have to go all the way back to 1972, before my parents were born, to find the last time that Syracuse went this long without making the NCAA tournament. And let's be honest, the NCAA tournament is fun. It's cool. But when Syracuse, our team, is not in it, at least from our perspective, it just doesn't feel the same, right? I even have my second favorite team still dancing, the Florida Gators. They just knocked off UConn. It's not the same without Syracuse. Hopefully they are back in the tournament next season. If they are not in the tournament next season, I think you could take a guess as to what's going to happen to Adrian Autry and this coaching staff. Right? This is a very critical offseason for the Orange. And the good news is that they are entering this transfer portal window with a lot of flexibility. What I'm about to tell you all is new across all of college basketball. Maybe you are already aware of this, but in case you are not, every team is now allowed 15 scholarships. This is up from the original 13 that the NCAA had up until this past season. Syracuse basketball, at the time of this recording, it is Sunday, March 23rd at 3:59 p.m. Eastern, so bear with me. These numbers can change by the time you are watching or listening to this podcast. But as of right now, Syracuse has 8 players that are supposed to return for next season, meaning they have 7 open scholarships remaining. They also do not have to fill all 15 scholarships. Last year, Syracuse filled 12 of the 13 scholarships they had. I also understand that you want depth on your roster because, well, sorry, folks, injuries are going to happen, even to Syracuse. You don't just get to play with the injury slider turned off. So you're going to want to have a lot of depth on the roster. However, you don't want to let getting that 14th or 15th guy get in the way of getting a better player that can help the top end of your roster. So I think it would be fine, and this is just my opinion here, if Syracuse only filled 12 of the 15 scholarships remaining. Even 11, I think, would generally be acceptable because you know what? If Syracuse isn't going to have the most money to throw around, and trust me, we're going to talk about money in the next segment, you're going to need to load up on that top-end talent and just hope that you get a little bit of injury luck next season. Now, the 8 players that are scheduled to return to Syracuse next year will go by order in which the year that they will be in next year. You got J.J. Starling, who will be a senior. Chance Westry, who will be a junior, but I believe he has multiple years of eligibility because of the red shirts and the injuries. Donnie Freeman, sophomore. Peter Mastorovich, sophomore. And then you have the 4 freshmen, Sadiq White, Kyan Anthony, Luke Fennell, and Aaron Womack. Who's out from Syracuse basketball, you may ask? Well, there are 5 players who ran out of eligibility at the end of last season. The 4 transfers that they got a year ago: Eddie Lampkin, Jair Davis, Jaquan Carlos, and Lucas Taylor. The one returning player that no longer has eligibility is Naheem McLeod. As far as who Syracuse has so far lost in the transfer portal, these players will officially enter it now. You got Chris Bell, who's going to be a senior, Kyle Cuff, who's going to be a senior with multiple years of eligibility left, and Elijah Chapa Moore, who will be a sophomore. So overall, Syracuse basketball enters the portal with a ton of flexibility, and hopefully they use those spots well. Now, coming up, we're going to talk about money. So that's next on Locked On Syracuse. Daylight savings snuck up on us again, and if you're feeling that lost hour of sleep, 5-Hour Energy has your back. The extra sunshine means more time for fun, but sometimes you need a little boost to power through. Whether you're staying up late watching the NCAA tournament, squeezing in a round of golf after work, or just trying to keep up with your busy day, 5-Hour Energy gives you that quick, refreshing pick-me-up whenever you need it. With longer days, I love getting outside for a hike or a run. Tropical Burst is my go-to for a quick boost. Head to 5hourenergy.com to find over 15 flavors to choose from, including watermelon, blue raspberry, and peach mango. You can even build your own 12-pack or 24-pack delivered right to your door. You need one now? Grab a 5-Hour Energy shot at your local grocery or convenience store. They're everywhere. Stock up today and stay energized. This is Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and this is your Syracuse Basketball 2025 Transfer Portal Guide. Let's talk about everyone's favorite subject, money. All right? money is not everything in the transfer portal, right? Once everyone's pretty much in the same ballpark in NIL offers, a lot of other factors come into play as far as where a player will ultimately choose to go to school for the following season. That being said, money is obviously very important. We know, or at least we have been told, that Syracuse will be spending a lot more on this year's roster than the reported $2.5 million on last year's team. It's going to be also helpful that Syracuse is going to the Vegas Players Era tournament next year. That'll net them an additional $1 million in NIL money to use. There's also the new revenue sharing, which we'll discuss. And hopefully Syracuse basketball raised more NIL money for this season. But On3's Jamie Shaw released an article earlier on Sunday stating that the top schools in the transfer portal will be spending around $7 million to $8 million. And then he also expects that Kansas and Louisville may even exceed that $7 to $8 million. Now, here's the thing. How much a team spends on a player in NIL is not public information unless it becomes public information, i.e., an agent or a player or a coach leaks the information out to the public. In pro sports, it's completely different, and it's a lot more simple. And honestly, college sports really needs to adapt to this. In pro sports, the player salaries are made public, and I'm going to let you all in on a little secret. It's not because of the fans. That is not why the player salaries are public. It's because the players and the teams want to know what the market looks like so that when they're on the market, they know what they should be asking for, and the teams know what the value of each player truly is. They can each come up with their own assessment. That's why you make everything public instead of having to go through all these back channels to try to figure out what a player is ultimately worth. College sports does not make that information publicly available unless it's leaked out. Hopefully it is corrected soon. So with that being said, we just have to hope that Syracuse basketball is financially competitive with other schools this offseason, because if the top schools are spending $7-8 million and Syracuse is stuck at $5 million, it's going to be pretty hard to build a competitive team next season. And if they don't build a competitive team next year, you know what happens to Adrian Autry and this coaching staff. Now, NIL, salary cap. Let's talk about it, okay? There is no salary cap for name, image, and likeness, NIL, nor can they be, nor should they be. And I'm sure you all are going to love that I just said that there should be no salary cap for name, image, and likeness. In simple terms, NIL means it's one's ability to profit off themselves. Imagine, I'm not going to name brands here, but imagine you, yes, you that's watching or listening to this podcast, have been offered to appear on the cover of your favorite cereal box. They're going to put your face on the cereal box, okay? Obviously, that cereal brand can throw you an offer, which would be name, image, and likeness value, and you could either choose to accept it, decline it, or counter that offer. But nobody is allowed to tell you you can only make this. That is it. We're going to cap your name, image, and likeness. You cannot do it, nor should you be allowed to do it. Imagine if I told you you can only make this on being on a cereal box. That's it. You're only allowed that. Sounds ridiculous, right? It's the same thing with players and coaches with NIL. You can cap salaries. That's different. You cannot cap someone's name, image, and likeness. That being said, the school has to have the money to be able to give to a player. A school can say, we're going to pay you $500,000, but the school better have the $500,000 to pay. And we've already seen tons of lawsuits out there with Florida State, especially with promising money in NIL deals and not ultimately being able to get the players the money that they were promised. So you can promise whatever you want, but you got to be able to deliver on the promise. Revenue sharing. This is capped because it's different from NIL. $20.5 million per school is the maximum allowed. This is pending a judge's approval, but it's probably going to be approved. That money can be used across all athletic programs at a respective university. As of now, Title IX will not impact how a school decides to distribute that rev share money. So for Syracuse and probably for many programs around the country, that revenue share will mostly be split between football and men's basketball. Obviously, there are exceptions to every university around the country, but that's what you should probably expect. That if Title IX doesn't get in the way and the judge approves the $20.5 million in revenue share, that Syracuse will probably split most of it between the football program and the men's basketball program. As far as value of players, the most valuable position in the transfer portal is the center position. On3 released an article over the weekend. It's expected that the top big men in the portal this year will receive between $1.5 and $2 million in NIL. We have already gone over here on this podcast how centers are incredibly expensive, even before this article was released by On3. That means if the top centers are going to be going between $1.5 to $2 million, that means the middle of the road centers are probably going to cost a pretty penny as well. My guess is at least $1 million for a middle of the road center. Last year, Eddie Lampkin, it was reported his NIL deal with Syracuse was $850,000. He was the 33rd ranked center in the 24/7 Sports transfer portal rankings. Granted, those are transfer portal rankings, but still, it's a pretty good idea as far as how valuable the center market is. We'll see how Syracuse decides to attack the center position, and we'll talk about needs for Syracuse in the next segment. But center is among the top needs for the Orange next year. So overall, hopefully that completes the money discussion. In short, we do not know how much Syracuse is going to spend on its players. Unless it gets leaked out, we're not going to know. Hopefully that does get corrected, or hopefully that does get leaked. There is no salary cap with NIL. There can't be, there shouldn't be. That being said, if a school promises a player a certain amount of money, they have to be able to deliver on that promise. Revenue sharing, we went over. Every school gets $20.5 million to spend. Syracuse has said it will spend to the cap, according to AD John Wildhack. As of now, Title IX will not impact it. And so most of that money will probably go towards football and men's basketball. And finally, the most valuable position in the portal is the center position. So that's the entire money conversation here for the transfer portal on Locked On Syracuse. Now, coming up, we could talk about what you should expect from Syracuse in the transfer portal. Don't go anywhere. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd, and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person, and getting tickets should not be stressful. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Game Time Picks. Curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, whatever you would like. I love the super deals. It's the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Once again, the transfer portal is officially open between now and April 22nd. Here's what you need to expect from Syracuse basketball. First thing, be on alert. Be on the lookout, because technically players that are eligible to return next season, they don't have to say publicly what they are going to do, because if they say nothing, it is assumed that they will be back with their respective team the following season. With that being said, be on alert for the statuses of JJ Starling and Donnie Freeman, whether either or both of them decide to stay, decide to go to the transfer portal, or decide to go to the NBA draft. Be on the lookout for those announcements of JJ Starling and Donnie Freeman over the next couple of days and weeks. Let's talk about position needs for Syracuse briefly. The two top needs for the Orange, in my opinion, are number one, a starting point guard, and number two, a center. There is a full podcast that we did here on Locked On Syracuse where we go more in depth about each of those needs. We also mentioned a couple of player names. That was just a couple of days ago. I do believe that Syracuse will come up with at least a starting point guard. TBD on the center position because they're incredibly expensive and you really don't want to invest in a middle-of-the-road center. Either go for the top or go for none at all. At least that would be my strategy. Beyond that, I do expect that Syracuse adds at least a couple of wing players in the transfer portal, and I would expect that Syracuse adds at least 4 total players in the transfer portal, and here's why. If nobody else on the team at this point decides to leave, for whatever reason, they have 8 players under scholarship for next year. You got to fill up a roster at least a little bit, right? You can't go into next season with 9 or 10 players under scholarship. You probably have to get to 12. It's a stretch to say 11. So I think they have to add at least 4 transfer portal players this offseason, and I would expect that to be the case. Now let's talk about the process in which a transfer goes from just being in the portal to hopefully Syracuse basketball, right? Let's talk about interest. Expect a lot of reports to come out over the next couple of days and weeks. Something along the lines of, this player is in the transfer portal. This player has heard from the following list of schools, and Syracuse is one of those schools mentioned. If Syracuse is expressing interest in a player, that means, well, they are interested. We don't know what degree they are interested in necessarily, but we do know that if they're expressing out to someone, they're definitely interested. We already have verified reports that the Orange have expressed interest in a couple of players. Kobe McGee, transfer from Drexel, and Jakari White, a transfer from North Dakota State. I will do my best throughout the offseason to track all the players that Syracuse is interested in and hopefully be able to record a podcast for all of them, whether it's a full podcast, a mini podcast. I will do my best, but also be on the lookout for players that Syracuse is interested in. I also should point out that sometimes a player will enter the transfer portal and they have what's called a do not contact tag on them. That means that, let me be nice. It means to all the other schools out there, don't contact that person. Don't text them, don't email them, don't call them. It really means that the player already knows where they want to go. It means that there has already been tampering involved with the player. That's what it really means. Okay, so if you see a player enter the transfer portal with a do not contact tag on him and you don't see anything connected to Syracuse, there is literally no chance that that player is going to Syracuse. There's a reason why a player will enter with a do not contact tag on them. It means they already know where they are going to go. We've seen it with a couple of players already in the portal. Owen Freeman from Iowa is probably the biggest one where he already knows where he's going to go. The guy from West Virginia who's going to follow his dad to Indiana also has the do not contact tag on him because they already know where they're going to go. Beyond the interest stage, let's say Syracuse reaches out to a player and there's mutual interest, right? Well, perhaps a visit to the campus will occur. Sometimes this information will be publicly available. Sometimes it won't. For example, when you look at last year with Syracuse basketball, we knew that Eddie Lampkin was visiting Syracuse. That was publicly available for everyone to know. But I do not believe we knew that Jaquan Carlos ever visited Syracuse until after it was reported he was transferring to the Orange. I think the way it went was Carlos entered the portal and you saw that Syracuse was interested in him. And then maybe a week or two went by and lo and behold, it just comes out nowhere. It was in the morning on a Tuesday or on a Monday or a Wednesday that Carlos had committed to Syracuse. And you see the pictures after of when he visited Syracuse, it was not made public. Now, sometimes a player will visit campus and it goes great. Eddie Lampkin committed, Jaquan Carlos committed, Jair Davis committed, Lucas Taylor committed. Sometimes it can go well, but it does not mean you're going to get the player. For example, Dakota LaFew. He visited Syracuse last year, then he visited Georgia afterwards, and ultimately he committed to Georgia. So just because you get the campus visit does not mean that the player will ultimately choose to go to you. They can still go on other visits. Also, this could happen where Syracuse has a visit lined up with the player, but that player ends up canceling the visit with the team because that first visit went so well, they're just going to commit to that school. That happened in the football transfer portal window we saw in December and January. That could happen as well. So I believe that is it for everything you really need to know about Syracuse basketball in the transfer portal, what to expect, the money that's being thrown around, the flexibility that the Orange will have. If you have any questions, feel free to comment in the comment section below. As far as what is coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the future, Monday during the day, I am not necessarily planning on recording anything. And if something breaks at night, I am probably not going to be available to record. So I would not expect anything to be released on Monday. Tuesday, we're going to react to everything that football head coach Fran Brown had to say in his first spring game press conference. We did something similar with Adrian Autry. The feedback seemed to be positive as far as that format. So we'll probably do something very similar to Fran Brown and react to all the comments. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On College Basketball Podcast with Isaac Shade and Andy Patton. March is here, so be the most informed college basketball fan throughout the madness. You can find Locked On College Basketball on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit that like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe, and you're going to want to turn on notifications because it's going to get really busy here this offseason, and Locked On Syracuse is here to track it all. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. Everyone, take care.